It all started when a meeting was being held in a large banquet hall. The head of this event asked his guest how he felt about such conditions. He said that his proposal would only benefit the partner country. But the guest didn't really like such an offer. He thought there was nothing profitable in it. So he said that they were only wasting their time. At this very time in the kitchen, the girl was preparing a dish without paying attention to anyone. One of the organizer's partners said that things are going badly and negotiations are very difficult this time, and they won't get a second chance. Their country is getting weaker by the day, and if someone dares to attack them, it will be the end for her. At that time, someone knocked on the door. One of the partners shouted out that they were in a meeting, but then the door opened, and on the threshold stood the very lady who was preparing something in the kitchen, and behind her were two other maids carrying trays of food. She came in, then apologized for the disturbance. At this time, the organizer told his guests that he thought they were tired after a long discussion, and asked permission to have his pastry chef demonstrate his fine talent. After that, the maids quickly placed all the dishes next to the assessors, and the guy told them to enjoy themselves. When the gentleman saw the beautiful dish in front of him, he thought it was just a wonderful flavor that beckoned him. So he decided to try this dish. After he tasted it, he said it was very tasty, and he had never eaten anything like it. After another serving, the gentleman asked what it was and why it tasted so good. At that moment, the girl who had prepared all this smiled and thought that this is the moment of truth. And it has come. I sweets the country will be able to avoid the crisis. A few months ago at Merway Manor, she woke up in a large and airy bed. She then looked in the mirror next to her and thought that no matter how many times she looked, she still couldn't get used to it. This was not Japan, but some other world that the girl knew nothing about. Life in her former world was a black hole. She lived in a poor family and her father beat them all the time. If we talk about happy moments, those were the days when they made different sweets together with their mother. In time, the girl started cooking on her own and showed her dishes to her mom. When she tasted it, she said that Amy's sweets would make people happy. Her mom said that she will definitely become a pastry chef in the future because she has a very big talent. Sure, the desserts came out a little inept and sloppy, but Amy was still happy. Unfortunately, her mom died very early. This was a big blow to the girl because her mom was her best light in such a dark world. Amy aspired to become a pastry chef because she believed her mom's words. Eventually, she managed to graduate from Min's evening culinary school, but because of her social skills, finding a job was very difficult. After a while, she was hired at a pastry shop where professionals worked. When the girl first got there, she didn't understand how they were so quickly because Amy was slow enough. Well, you see, all of a sudden one of the cook's cakes fell down, and the one who made it got very angry because she spent a lot of time making it. But then suddenly the chief came into the kitchen and asked why they were yelling. And why aren't they working? Because they have a lot of orders to fill. All of a sudden this girl said Amy ruined her cake, but she didn't. When the chief heard this, he got very angry and started yelling at the girl that she had done something wrong again and she was no use to him. Once again she couldn't say anything. In her defense, she just stood there and watched them yell at her. When she got home, she thought that if the chief calmed down tomorrow, she would be sure to explain everything to him, just the way it was. But then suddenly, as she was crossing the road, she didn't see a truck coming at her. At that moment, when people on the street were screaming that they had hit a man, the girl couldn't believe that she had died. The girl wanted to make many more sweets, not just end this life like that. At this moment, when she opened her eyes, she was already sitting, reincarnated in Shanti's body. It was a girl from another world, and since then, 3 days have passed and people treated her with disdain. When she came up to ask for help, everyone turned away from her and did not listen to her. Apparently, Shanti is the daughter of the current head of the house and his now deceased mistress. A simple girl. That's why she has a low position in the house. And everyone who could treated her as a slack and worthless girl. Because of all these reasons, this girl chose death, and Amy somehow became possessed in her dead body. This world was no different from her previous life. Here too, she was a girl, unable to say anything in her own defense. No, it was even worse for Amy here though, because there are no sweets in that world. Amy had already checked this fact more than once, so it was accurate information. And the reason was clear. First of all, sugar was very expensive here, and it was almost worth its weight in gold. And you can't make many sweets without sugar. Amy would put up with the world if she had the opportunity to make desserts. Well, as it was, she sat on her bed and hoped it was all just a dream. and when she woke up, she would go back to her life where she could make beautiful sweets. But suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by the maid, who burst into her room without knocking and asked how long she was going to sleep. She was holding a tray of food. At this point, Amy thought, she hadn't even knocked. No respect they had. The maid said that carrying breakfast to an idiot like her is like wasting groceries. That maid is always making fun of Shanti. When she started to bring Amy's food up, someone laughed because even the breakfast service is more decent than hers. The maid then threw her food on the table so that the fruit fell to the floor and the milk all spilled out. When Amy saw the state her food was in, she tried to say something. "If you're going to act like this, I'll—" The maid interrupted her and asked her why she was looking so angry. And at that moment the girl realized that the maid was looking down on her, and everything was just as it had been in the past. Nothing had changed. After looking at the girl some more, the maid said that if she wouldn't eat it, then she didn't need it anymore. And with these words, she lifted her foot and aimed at the orange. But the girl immediately jumped out of bed and covered him with her hands, yelling for her to stop. "Let's put the text in order, correct mistakes and punctuation." Amy thought that as hard as it was for her, if she didn't want things to happen again, she had to change right now. When the maid saw this picture, she said that Shanti had already lost her mind over some trifle. At this point, Amy thought she had already died once, and there was no point in holding back anymore. So rising to her feet, she told the maid not to dare to treat the food so rudely again, for it was inexcusable. When she heard these words, she laughed a great deal and said, "Unforgivable? Are you even out of your mind?" But Shanti ignored her questions and said that she had been patient and silent, but that was getting to the point. She then said that if the maid ever again treated her work so badly, she would be punished, and she ordered her to redo her breakfast. Walking over to the tray, Amy said she'd better not, because she'd mess something up again, and she'd better let her show her how to make a great breakfast herself. The maid couldn't believe her ears and said it was impossible, but Amy didn't listen to her and wondered why she hadn't realized it sooner. If there really were no sweets in this world, she just had to make them. After their conversation, Amy changed her clothes and they went to the kitchen. When she went in there, she saw so many beautiful things because the kitchen was very big. After that, the girl began to look at every corner and thought that this was the real kitchen of an aristocrat. When the other cooks saw who had come into their kitchen, they did not understand what she was here for. Some said she would only get in the way, and some assumed she didn't like her breakfast. While Amy was talking to her maid, the chief came up to them and apologized. Afterwards, he said that this place was not for a young lady like her. His face was very menacing, and he clearly did not like this girl being in his kitchen. But since Amy had decided not to live in her past life, she told him, "I'm sorry, but I came here because I was served food inappropriate for young ladies." When the chief heard this, he was surprised and wondered if she had always objected so openly. But afterward he told her to let her do as she pleased. At this point, Amy realized that there seemed to be nothing more to say to him. But then suddenly her musings were interrupted by the voice of the maid, who said that she had brought what the girl had told her about. When Amy saw it, she knew it was really him, and now she has everything ready to fulfill her passion for making desserts. She thanked the maid and said they could start already. When Amy picked up the tools she would use to cook, she thought that even though the world is different, the utensils are still the same everywhere. She then proceeded to explain to her maid that she needed to start by beating the eggs well in a bowl. When the chief started watching all her actions, he thought she had experience. After that, he assumed she wanted to make an omelet. He then looked at the way she whipped the eggs and thought the consistency wasn't right for an omelet, and realized she wasn't capable of anything after all. The girl then said that honey should be added to the whipped eggs, and then carefully began to pour it in. When everyone around her saw what she was doing, they were shocked and didn't understand what good could come out of it. One of the cooks even said he had a bad feeling because it was very strange for him to add honey to eggs. The chief watched the process closely and thought that the suicide was not without consequence, and she was probably insane. But for Amy, it's that reaction because to them, it looks the same as if someone in her world decided to mix eggs with energy drink. But the girl didn't stop and said at this point, they needed to add more milk and mix everything well. After that, they need to strain everything they get and pour it into a deep tray. When the maid saw what she was doing, she asked the young mistress what it was. Amy explained to her that this way the egg mixture would soak into the bread more easily. The maid didn't really understand why it had to soak, but the girl went on and said that the bread should then be toasted on all sides until it had a beautiful yellow hue. When Amy looked at everything she made, she realized that she wished she had left it to soak overnight, for the flavor to really come through. After a little thought, she realized that they would not listen to her. So she said that now she had to make holes in the bread with a fork. After that, she said to carefully dip the bread into the egg mixture. When the chief saw what she had done, he realized that by making a hole in the bread, she had accelerated the soaking process. But then suddenly one of the cooks decided to intervene and said that even though she was a young lady, it was okay to play with food. And he started approaching Shanti. But the chief reached out and stopped him. Then she was very surprised and didn't understand why he was doing that. Amy then laid the well-soaked bread out on the mold and figured it was stale from the start, so it all soaked up nicely. After that, she said to grease the skillet with oil and fry the bread on low heat. At that moment, the chief thought that bread had a very sweet flavor from ancient times. Then he sniffed carefully and heard a combination of wheat, honey, and a faint hint of butter. The chef realized he had never seen anything like it before and wondered what the dish tasted like. While Amy was toasting the bread, she thought to flip it over as soon as one side was lightly browned. After that, she said to finish it all off with an orange garnish and a generous drizzle of honey. She put it all on a plate and said that the French toast with honey was ready. After that, Amy went to the table to eat breakfast. The maids behind her began to whisper. They couldn't believe that she had made it herself in the kitchen. Below is the text with corrected spelling and punctuation. After that, a plate of food was brought to her. The maids couldn't believe she could cook it herself. I didn't realize I was living. The blood of a commoner flows after all. After that, the aroma of the dish wafted to them, and they didn't understand why the damn bread smelled so good. When they got closer, they saw the dish and thought it looked really good. Amy then picked up her fork and tasted a piece of her creation. She realized that the orange was a little sour, but it paired perfectly with the sweet honey. The girl thought that the bread was as if it had been reborn. There was a slight flavor of butter. It was a perfect honey bread. She realized it was delicious and was happy. After she finished eating, she went to the kitchen to wash all the dishes behind her. As she was putting on her gloves, the chief came up to her and volunteered to clean up for a taste assessment. But he didn't expect to meet a genius in such a place. Because when he tasted it, it was delicious, and even he couldn't cook anything like it. Then he realized that a new age was coming. At this point, Amy went back to her room and collapsed on her bed, thinking she was finally full. She then turned on her side and looked out the window, thinking that she must have already managed to die in the past world. She reflected on what little she had had time to experience and see, because she had no family and no loved one. That's why it was so hard for her to imagine how she could live without sweets. Sugar does exist in this world after all. She just can't get it yet. Amy already had a goal. So for the sake of her candy, she would be sure to get sugar. The next day, as Amy sat at her desk reading a book, she thought about the fact that almost no one on this continent produced sugar. But then suddenly there was a knock at her door, and a maid came in saying that her master called for her. So Amy got up from her table and went with the maid. When they were under the gentleman's door, she knocked and said, "I beg your pardon, I have brought the young mistress." After that she entered the room and said that it was Shanti, coming closer to him. She asked if her father had any business with her. Looking at his daughter with an angry look, the father slapped his hand on the table and asked what it was, and how dare she do such a thing. She has the noble name of Manhwa and runs around the kitchen like a servant. At that moment, Amy thought that was why he was so angry and had called her. At that moment, she thought that under no circumstances should she show fear. So in a calm voice, she said that it was delicious. At this point, her father asked if she wanted to make his house look like a bunch of idiots. When Amy heard this, she was very surprised and said she was the only one being an idiot. But she was still scared, and the girl didn't understand why she couldn't stop shivering. After that, she started to say that she was aware that she was. But her father immediately interrupted her and said that apparently the suicide game wasn't enough for her, and she decided to rebel against him. The girl didn't realize if this fear was Shanti's or her own. At that moment she felt like she was about to fall. After calming down a bit, her father told her not to act so vulgar again and never to appear in the kitchen. She was surprised to hear that she was behaving vulgarly in her father's opinion. But he went on and told her to understand her place and not to try to besmirch the name of Manhwa again. But Amy would not let go of that thought. It angered her that her father thought that cooking in the kitchen meant acting vulgar, and that suddenly she remembered those times when she was cooking with her mom in the kitchen. She would tell her to warm the oil to room temperature. After that, she will add the eggs and mix everything well. Amy always asked her mom to stir. Of course she agreed, and the girl was very happy about it. And her mother said that she always liked to make sweets so much. After thinking a bit about the whole situation, Amy went to Earl Merway and told him that she wanted to leave this house. When the gentleman heard this, he became even more angry. The girl calmly said that she did not want to endure his insults any longer, and she thought that sweets were part of her precious memories. So she decided to become a pastry chef in memory of her mother. At that moment, the Count thought that before she was afraid to say a word, and now she was about to leave home. He asked his daughter if she was sure of her decision. Shanti said she was absolutely sure and would not back down. After that, the Earl said that if she left this house, she would be forbidden to use the surname Merway. When he said that, he thought that she was bluffing, and that she would not have the strength to carry out her plans. But the girl said she agreed and would never call herself Merway again, and in return, she asked that he never bother her again. Hearing her condition, he slapped his hand on the table so that all the papers flew around and told her to get out of here. She thanked the Count for everything, bowed, and left the room. Then she heard him strike his hand on the table again. Door. She realized that she had succeeded, and now she was no longer connected to the Merway family. Amy was overjoyed at this news. After that, she went to her room and started packing her suitcase, thinking that when she left here she would try to get some sugar, and while she had a kitchen, she could make some sweets. After that, she went outside, and thought that at first she would have to live on the money from the clothes she sold, and look for a kitchen that was looking for employees. Luckily for Amy, Merway's home is in the capital of the Kingdom of Gastrom. You can always find housing and a workplace there, so you can consider her lucky. When the girl was already approaching the gate, she noticed that the chief approached her. She was very surprised at that. The man spoke first and said, "Young mistress, I hear you have left the house?" But she said she was no longer a young mistress. He agreed with her. At that moment she wondered why he had decided to approach her so suddenly. The chief at this time pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and said that he had brought this to her. The slip of paper said that they were recruiting chefs and that they were looking for someone who was confident in their abilities. When the girl took the leaflet in her hands, she was surprised, and the chief explained that this leaflet is quite famous among cooks. The employer is not known, but his requirements are very high, that not everyone can pass the selection. Amy said, "An unknown employer was able to send an invitation to the Earl's own house. Suspicious, isn't it?" The chief said she might be right, but he's too old for new discoveries and job changes. And the home cooks got scared and declined the invitation. They already had enough places they couldn't go. Amy wondered and asked why he'd given her the invitation. The chief said that he must confess of what he had tried to the bite of the breakfast she made. He said it was the first time he had ever tasted something like this in his entire career. It was very tasty to him, and he thought that maybe the young mistress could pass this difficult contest. When Amy heard this, she smiled and thought that it turns out this chief is kind. Afterward, she said she would definitely get the job. Then she turned around and left. When she came to the city, she really liked the cityscape. But she raised that first she should get a job, and then get used to this life. When she passed by some vendor, she overheard their conversation. The seller asked the man to buy at least some, but the man started shouting and said that he didn't need wheat because he already had a lot of it. As she passed people discussing how there were no good jobs anywhere, she realized that everywhere there would be those whose lives were hard. Amy realized that she had to try her best to get the job. When she arrived at the selection site, she saw the huge mansion in front of her, and realized that it was even bigger than the one Earl Merway had. Suddenly, two guys walked towards her who were very upset. She thought that these guys must have been unlucky, and then she suddenly realized that maybe this selection is very difficult. Now she understood why the house cooks were scared, but her carefree future depended on her own success, so she didn't think of backing down. After that, she went to the kitchen where she has to prepare a dish for the contest. When she entered, she saw a huge kitchen with many cooks cooking. This kitchen was many times more spacious than the Earl's kitchen, and the equipment was much better. When she walked over and opened the doors, she saw the refrigerator and was very surprised and happy about it. It was something commonplace in her original world, she thought. Technology had come very far in this house. It made her happy to think that she would one day make her sweets there. Here she remembered that when she had first entered the house, she had been examined very carefully, and she realized that they took this very seriously. Amy thought she might have seemed suspicious to them, which was why she was given such an examination. But then suddenly her musings were interrupted by a guy who came up to her and asked what a woman was doing in the kitchen. He smiled afterward and said he understood, assuming she was one of the local maids. Amy didn't understand who it was and why he was talking to her like that, but she decided not to cause a scandal and said that she was one of the contestants. Hearing this, he said, Whoa, people came here to compete in their cooking skills. A girl like you belongs more in some city cafeteria." After that, he came closer to her and put his hand on her cheek and told her face was okay, and also asked if she wanted to be his personal taster. She immediately pulled his hand away with a punch and said, "Since you have so much free time to stretch your hands on a girl, maybe you should practice your cooking skills instead." After she moved away from him a bit, then he thought that this girl dared to reject him, and it made the guy very angry. Amy wondered what that had just been. Apparently, idiots would be found in any world. In order to distract herself somehow, she looked at the other contestants and realized that they were simply amazing. You could tell from the blisters alone that they were all professionals. And then suddenly, the judge came into the kitchen and said that now he was going to explain the rules. So all the people stopped talking and started listening attentively. "We have prepared the ingredients for you in 2 hours. You have to prepare your dish. The theme of today's contest is a dish that even a person with a missing appetite will want to eat," he said. "I should note that lack of appetite does not always mean that the dish is being prepared for an elderly person. So your time is up right now," the judge said, and the round began. At this time, all the contestants ran to the products and their surfaces. As Amy stood still and thought about the theme of the contest, she didn't know what she could make for a man with no appetite. At this time, all the participants started taking the food. Some even started fighting over it. The girl realized that this would not end well, and all the products would be taken away from her, and she would definitely not be able to cook without ingredients. So she immediately ran towards the food stand, but then she tripped over something and fell down. After that, she heard a voice. It was the same guy she was talking to in the beginning. He said she shouldn't have challenged him, so let him pay for it now. When the girl rolled over, she saw that she had scraped her knee. After that, she felt a lot of pain. At this point, the guy leaned over and said that the wounded should get out of the kitchen because they would only get in the way. Amy thought this guy was really pissing her off, but realized that she needed to decontaminate the wound right away in order to keep any infection out. After that, the girl quickly got to her feet and ran out into the hallway towards the nurse's station, in order not to waste a moment. Then suddenly a guy came out behind her and thought it was one of the applicants. But he didn't realize why she was here now and not in the kitchen. When the girl ran to the nurse's station, the nurse quickly bandaged her knee. The girl figured she couldn't just sit here and waste this precious time, so she decided to think of a contest theme. "Well, what should I cook for a person who doesn't even have an appetite? How am I supposed to do that? I can't lose this contest," thought the girl. But then she suddenly remembered that when she was sick, her mother always cooked her one very suitable dish, which immediately raised the girl's appetite. Amy immediately looked at her watch and realized that at this rate, she wouldn't have enough time. At that time, the guy who saw the girl in the hallway came into the room. There was a guy sitting in a chair who was all pale and exhausted. He said, "Ash, no matter how many times we try, it's still one big waste of time. It didn't work last time either." The boy said that he didn't fully understand Mr. Gesture. So the gentleman said to him, "Have you already forgotten that I throw up every time after eating?" At this point, the lad thought that if this continued, the Lord's life would be in danger, and that it was only in his power to create an opportunity, so he would not stop trying. At that moment, many contestants had already finished preparing their dishes. One of them thought that just by seeing his dish, a person would immediately have an appetite. The other thought that a nutritious dish would always help at times when the body was weak. So he prepared just such a dish. At this point, the judge said that time was up, but then suddenly a girl burst into the room. She said she was one of the contestants, and here was her dish. The judge invited her to stand next to the contestants. At that moment, Amy thought she was lucky to be on time. When she approached the participants, the mean guy said she had been gone so long, he thought she had run away. The girl answered him nothing, and thought to herself, "Why should I run away from her?" That suddenly the doors opened, and Mr. Zest and his assistant who was carrying him began to enter the hall. When the contestants saw who walked into the auditorium, they didn't realize who it was because they had never seen him before. At this moment, the girl thought that this guy was very handsome, but gaunt, and because of his illness, he had no appetite. At this point, the girl thought she hoped he could eat some of it, because by the looks of it, he didn't feel well at all. The black-haired guy said they were starting the selection and asked each of the chefs to stand next to their dish. When each one came to his dish, they opened the lids. The angry guy turned to the girl and asked her why she was in no hurry to open her dish, if she was embarrassed by the horror she had made. At that moment, the girl thought that she wasn't shy about anything. There was a reason she kept the lid closed until the last. As the gentleman began to pass fleetingly, one of the smells made him feel sick. At this point, his assistant thought they had failed again. When they pulled up to the girl's house, the guy asked to lift the lid for them to look at the dish, and the girl lifted the lid with pleasure, and underneath it on a plate was a small yellow-colored dessert. The contestants who were standing next to her started laughing when they saw her dish because they didn't realize what it was. Someone even suggested that it was glass and it was inedible. That guy who had been hurting the girl from the beginning said it was just a masterpiece, and it turns out she can't even cook properly. After that, this fellow turned to the Lord and said that he had better not eat what this woman had prepared, because it was dangerous. The deputy asked what that meant, and the guy explained that he'd seen the whole thing. She'd taken some weird flasks from the infirmary and used their contents in cooking. The boy then suggested that the flasks were probably filled with poison. When people heard this, they were frightened and began to whisper. But the girl immediately shouted that it was not poison. She said she had only taken the ingredients needed for the concoction from the infirmary, and to make sure they could ask their healer about it. After that, the assistant ordered the maid to call for the healer very quickly. She then turned to Mr. Zest and said that he had also seen her walking to the infirmary when she hurt herself, and he had called a healer to make sure. The master then looked at the ingredients she had taken and asked if she had used them. When his assistant said that she had used the ingredients, the master replied that he did not see any problem. Afterward, he asked what the taster's verdict was. The girl said she had never seen anything like it before, but there was no poison in it. Amy, having heard their entire conversation, thought he wouldn't even try her dish after that. But then suddenly, the master asked Asha to bring her dish. Everyone was very surprised to hear this, and his assistant agreed. After the gentleman took the dish in his hands, he broke off a piece and put it in his mouth. He put his hand to his mouth. Everyone around him immediately thought he had gotten sick, and the girl thought he didn't like it because of the unfamiliar taste. She thought he definitely didn't like it, and didn't understand what she would do if he spit it out. But then suddenly the gentleman took another spoonful and put it in his mouth. When everyone saw it, they were very surprised, and Ash was glad because Mr. Zest was able to eat it. At this point, the gentleman thought it looked like polished crystal. On texture, it is soft and melts in the mouth, slightly elastic in shape and a slight sweetness. He could swallow it without even chewing it. After he ate another bite, he thought it was really good and he liked it. At that moment, when the girl looked at him, she realized she could take it easy. He liked everything. After a short pause, the guy asked the girl what this dish was. Amy immediately answered him that it was a dessert called jelly. When the guy heard this, he was very surprised because he had never heard a dish called dessert before. The girl then explained to him that she had mixed water with gelatin and honey, and at the end, she cooled the whole mixture, and this is what the jelly turned out to be. When the other contestants heard this recipe, they didn't understand why honey should be added. In fact, they didn't know what gelatin was. Gelatin is mostly known to cooks who use beef bones to make soup. Gelatin is the residue that usually remains after the bones have been boiled. A few hours earlier, when Amy was still in the nurse's station and realized that she couldn't just waste precious time, she looked at the shelf where the different medicines were kept, and there she noticed a jar of gelatin, and in that moment she realized she could make it. Amy then proceeded to explain to all the guests in the room that gelatin is found in beef bones. When refrigerated, it has an elastic texture. In her original world, gelatin was also used medicinally. Since it was a healing agent, she shouldn't have a problem using it. Afterward, the girl said that gelatin is well digested and great as a food for the sick. When Mr. Zest heard that, he was surprised that it could even be used like that. After that, the girl immediately asked if he liked the sweet flavor of honey. "Those sweets may not be a vital thing, but they make it brighter and food tastier," said Shanti. And at that moment, when the guy with the red hair heard all this, he got very angry. He ran to the gentleman and said that he worked for Baron Malaban himself. He was his sous chef. He went closer to the gentleman and asked him what was wrong with his dish, why he chose that strange dish from the girl. When this guy almost touched the lord, his assistant ran up and immediately knocked this guy to the floor. After that, Ash turned to the master and asked him to apologize because he had been negligent. But the master told him not to worry, and everything was fine. The guy who was on the floor kept resisting and shouting that it was all wrong and illegal. But Ash leaned closer to his ear and told him to be quiet because he was now in front of Mr. Zest Grassage. When the guy heard this, he was very surprised that this man is Grassage, because he is the second prince. When they heard that, they were also surprised at what they were preparing for the prince. At that moment, the boy with red hair broke free from the hands of the prince's assistant and ran to the master. He then knelt before him and asked for his forgiveness because he had no idea and didn't mean to insult him like that. Then he said that this girl was indeed suspicious, and he was worried for the prince's safety. But the master said he had no more strength to listen to all his excuses, and told his assistant to take him out. He turned to the contestants and said they were all incredibly talented. He was very sorry that he couldn't taste their dishes, and he said that if they were okay with it, he would like his servants to taste the dishes. At that moment, Amy thought that even though he was in danger, she couldn't call him weak. After a brief pause, Mr. Zest turned to Shanti and said that she must have been uncomfortable listening to all this and asked if she was okay. The girl answered him that she was fine, and thanks to His Highness she was not hurt. But she thought she was getting nervous because the prince was sitting in front of her. The master asked the girl to tell her name. Amy replied that her name was Shanti. After all that had happened, some time later, Amy was already sitting in the carriage and they were on their way. At that moment, the girl couldn't believe that she would ride in the same carriage with the prince. She couldn't even dream of it before. At that moment, she looked at the gentleman and saw that something was wrong with him. She asked if he was okay because he looked like he was not feeling well. He said he was just a little tired because he hadn't talked in such a long time. After that, he said he noticed that the girl was limping a bit. She said that she had hurt herself a little. When the gentleman heard this, he was surprised and asked how she could have hurt herself. His assistant, Ash, said that the cook they recently arrested intentionally knocked her down, so she fell and cut herself. Mr. Zest said that it was very disgusting to do that to a girl. He then turned to his assistant and asked him, "Look, why don't we let him enjoy traveling far and long? What do you think of that idea?" When the girl heard this sentence, she laughed. Then she looked out the window and saw that they were already approaching the castle. At that moment, she thought, she'd never seen anything like this before. This looks amazing. In that moment, she was convinced that this was another world. At that moment, the gentleman looked at the girl and thought. He remembered how he had offered her to be his chef. The girl gladly accepted his offer, and at that moment he realized that she didn't give her surname, but it was obvious from her bows that she had been brought up as an aristocrat. He wondered who she was and where she had come into his life with the new desserts. When they arrived at the castle, Ash escorted the girl to her room. As soon as she entered it, she was surprised. This room was 1,000 times better than the room she had at the count's estate. There was so much space. When the prince's aide looked at her expression, he asked, "Miss, is there something wrong with you?" She said it was just the opposite and that room was too nice. But Ash said that everything in that room was completely at her disposal. She should feel free to use it. She thanked him and then asked if he could show her the kitchen. After they arrived, the girl saw that this was a much better kitchen than all the previous ones. It was very large, and everything shone with cleanliness. After that, she walked over to the different drawers and began to look at their contents. She saw that there was equipment for every taste. As she continued to look through the drawers, she realized there was no sign that sugar existed. That made her a little sad. Suddenly, someone came up behind her and asked her what she was doing here. It was the local chefs. But the girl was not confused. She stood up, bowed, and said that her name was Shanti, and from today, she would work together with them. When the cooks heard this, they were surprised because they had not heard anything about it before. Afterward, the chief came into the kitchen and asked what was going on and why they weren't working. When he got closer, he saw the girl and wondered what she was doing in the kitchen, because he had been told she wouldn't be coming to see them until tomorrow. As the chef came closer, one of the cooks asked, "Have we got a new maid in the kitchen?" But the chief explained that she was not a maid, but had been hired as a cook, and the second prince himself had recommended her. When the other workers heard this, they were very surprised because this girl and she is very young for a cook. At this point, Amy thought it was very awkward, but they were understandable because it was the same in her original world. All newcomers always start as helpers in the kitchen. They gradually master all the subtleties of the work, and at one point they are finally put behind the cooking, and this is a natural process. So for the girl, their displeasure was completely understandable, but she realized that something had to be done about it. So Amy asked the chefs if they would agree to try her dish, in order that they would not doubt her competence. They agreed, of course, and after a while the girl prepared her beautiful desserts, and they tasted them. Everyone in the kitchen was delighted with the wonderful taste. The first thing she made was a whole apple compote. While they ate, she explained the recipe. Compote is made when fruit is cooked in syrup, simply put, a sweet solution. But before she could finish, she was interrupted. The chef said they were happy to welcome her into the royal kitchen. She got embarrassed and thanked them. After a while, the girl took her dish and knocked on the door, asking, "May I come in?" When she entered the room, Mr. Zest said he was waiting for her. He had another man standing next to him. So when Shanti came closer, he introduced him. "Shanti, meet Tran. He is my doctor and has been taking care of me for a very long time," said the gentleman. After that, the doctor turned to the girl and asked, "So, you are the cook whose dish the prince was able to taste?" She said that she was the one. And then she turned to the master and said that this time she had made a dessert of apple. It's a kind of jelly. It's a fairly light dish that digests quickly, so she hopes the gentleman will like it. Afterward, she asked if he wanted to try it. He naturally did not refuse. So he sat down at the table and started sampling the new dessert. When he tasted it, he said it was really delicious. Afterwards, he thought that a wonderful aroma of fruit and something mysterious was spreading through the room. He realized that the scent of apples gave him the illusion that an apple orchard had grown around him. The mysterious flavor was cinnamon, which the girl added because it goes well with apples. The doctor then came closer to the table and asked what kind of dish this was. The gentleman explained that she makes dishes called desserts. They are very unusual, but incredibly delicious and sweet. After that, the doctor leaned over and began to scrutinize the dish. The girl asked if he wanted to try it too. The doctor declined and said it was time for him to go back to his office. Before leaving, he reminded the prince to remember to take his medicine. Mr. Zest said he remembered and would take it. When the doctor left, the girl asked what these other medicines were. The master explained that they were such nutrients. Tran always asked to take them every time he feels well. The girl wondered what these nutrients were made up of, but she didn't bother to ask. The prince said the only downside is that they taste bitter. The girl said that maybe it was worth it because it was for his own health. A few days later, the kitchen was in turmoil. All the cooks were shouting. Someone shouted, "Maybe make some soup." Another answered him that there was no time for that at all. The waiters were busy too. They were passing out different plates and other food paraphernalia. Palace chefs are all business, Amy thought. Professional chefs know no sleep or rest, designing dishes for the royal family and palace balls. The others are preparing meals for all the other palace servants, she thought further. There was a lot to do, and there was nothing to be distracted by. So it was Amy's responsibility to prepare all the ingredients, as well as making the sweets for the prince. Suddenly, not far from the girl, the chef was talking to two cooks. One of them said that it couldn't be a question because they had seen the cooking process themselves, said the second prince's doctor told them clearly. So he called Shanti and told her to come to them for a moment. At this point, the girl thought she was likely to be given a new assignment, so she went straight to the chief. When approached, the chief said he knew she was working hard, so it was hard for him to tell her. After a brief silence, the chief said she was kind of fired. The girl repeated cheerfully that she was fired, but then when the information reached her, she was not cheerful. She could not believe her eyes. How could it be she could be fired? So she immediately went to the prince, and when she entered his room, she said, "Your Highness Zest, I apologize for coming uninvited, but may I know the reason for my dismissal? But the Lord said to take it easy, and it's okay. Thanks to her desserts, he can finally build up his strength. He also said he would never let her get fired. The girl was very much surprised and said, "But your highness, if I was not dismissed by your order, why?" The master said, "Tran seems to be suspicious of your desserts." When the girl heard that, she wondered why it was the doctor who suspected her of something. Master said that in the past, Tran saved his life when he was on the verge of death, so he is still alive today only because of him. The girl realized that his doctor was a savior to the Lord. The prince said that in the last few days he did not recognize him. The master explained that Tran keeps telling him that sweets ruin the body, and to his weak body they are like poison. His master tried to explain to him that this was not the case and that they were, on the contrary, helping him get back on his feet, but still keeps telling him about the prince not eating more sweets. At this point, the girl thought, there are no such opportunities in this country. There are many sweet things to eat, so she understood why the doctor was so wary. At this point, Amy said she would try to explain everything to Mr. Tran and ran off. When the prince and his assistant were alone, Ash said, "Mr. Zest, about Miss Shanti's case." The gentleman asked, "What is it?" His assistant explained that her letter of invitation had originally been sent to the Merway house. The Earl's chef confirmed that he was the one who had given her the letter. "Aye, Lord, I heard this," then wondered, and Ash continued, "Apparently she is the daughter of an Earl, but she has severed all ties with her family and no longer uses their surname." At that moment, the prince realized why she introduced herself as a commoner but acted like an aristocrat. Ash said that apparently she was treated very harshly at the estate, which is why she cut all ties with the count and started cooking amazing dishes. The prince confirmed his words. Her desserts are indeed a real revolution in cooking. His assistant asked what he would order next. Zest told him that Shanti wasn't dangerous. He felt he should close the investigation. When Ash heard this, she was very surprised. The prince asked why he was so surprised. His assistant said it was nothing. It was just that usually the Lord rarely trusts other people. The prince himself doesn't understand why, but he wants to trust her very much. And he also had this premonition that her sweets could change the whole country. After that, the prince said to take care of the dismissal issue so that she wouldn't worry too much. His assistant smiled and said that he would do everything. At this point, the girl had already come to the healer's room and was trying to prove to him that if he saw her cooking them, he would realize it was just a misunderstanding. The doctor said he understood perfectly well without that, and he would not allow Mr. Zest to consume unknown substances, such as her sweets. She tried to justify that Mr. Zest was feeling much better afterwards. She asked that, as a doctor, shouldn't he have noticed it first? After that, the doctor looked at her angrily and said that she should be put behind bars as a threat to the royal family. But if she left the castle now, he would turn a blind eye to her antics. After that, the doctor told her to pack her things as soon as possible and leave the castle. The girl thought it would be harder to persuade him than she had thought. After the unpleasant conversation, she returned to the kitchen and realized that the doctor was now acting completely differently. She couldn't get him to try the compote last time. Amy thought that if he had tasted her sweets just once, the misunderstanding would be resolved and everyone would be happy. The girl thought that she shouldn't think about it anymore, but rather take care of the prince. She decided that maybe now the prince was able to eat something like bread. So Amy decided to make cupcakes this time. When she had prepared all the products, she thought that they should be enough. As soon as she got ready to cook, she remembered that she had given her apron to the laundry, so she went to get it. As soon as she ran out, the doctor immediately walked through the open door into the kitchen. After a while, when the girl had already prepared the dough and put them in the oven, she noticed that they didn't rise at all. She thought she might have gotten the proportions wrong and decided to taste the dough. When she took a bite, she realized it was disgusting. She immediately spit it out and thought that even if it wasn't disgusting, it was more likely to be very, very bitter. Then she broke through another cupcake and realized that the batter was very heavy. She thought maybe it was because the cupcakes hadn't risen. But even with bad ingredients, that wasn't supposed to happen. She still didn't understand why it was often so bitter. Suddenly she felt sick, and everything around her began to spin. She couldn't stay on her feet and fell, losing consciousness. After a while, the girl heard distant voices. "Shanti, Shanti." When she started to open her eyes, she saw the power of this man. After she had the strength to fully open her eyes and hear everything, the gentleman told her that he was very glad she had come to her senses. The girl had a very bad headache when she saw Prince Zest in front of her. She was very surprised and didn't understand what was even going on here. After a brief pause, she apologized and started to stand up abruptly. But then suddenly her headache started again and she almost fell down. So the prince told her not to move. The guy said he found her in the kitchen and she was lying unconscious. At that moment, the girl thought she had fainted and fallen down after eating that cupcake. Afterward, the prince said that he was thinking that she could use some rest. She thanked him, but said she had something to tell him. Afterward, she told him everything as it happened, and he was very surprised to hear that the dessert had a strange, bitter taste. The girl said it was probably her messing up the proportions. She wasn't used to making it yet, but she had a very strange feeling about the bitterness. The master thanked her for telling him everything. She said it was nothing, and asked if there was any change in his condition. The guy said he felt perfectly fine. The girl said she was very happy to hear that. After a brief pause, when the prince saw that she was already falling asleep, he told her to rest and gain strength. So he left. When evening came, his assistant came into Mr. Zest's room and wanted to say something to him about Miss Shanti. The prince interrupted him at once and said he knew what he meant because her symptoms were exactly like his when he first lay down with the disease. Ash told him that when questioned, it appeared that Dr. Tran was acting very suspiciously. When the prince heard this, he asked his assistant what he was getting at. Ash explained that he had been spotted standing near the kitchen when Miss Shanti was making sweets, and after she was carried away from there, he kept turning around and was afraid of being spotted. The gentleman then asked where the muffins she had prepared were. The assistant replied that Dr. Tran must have already disposed of them. Ash asked the gentleman, "Do you think he's a criminal?" Tran had been with Zest since he was a child, and he had always taken care of him. Ever since he met Shanti, his body has been recovering right before his eyes. The prince replied that he doesn't want to believe it, but Shanti did get hurt, and he needs to find out what happened because he is the one who brought her here. Besides, she wanted to make me cupcakes. I wish I could have tasted them, said the prince. At this point, the doctor was sitting in his room thinking, happy that everything was going according to plan, and this girl was off the hook. Tran realized that the prince was on the mend, but he was ordered to watch her, not kill her. But it didn't matter. She was making sweets for the prince. If poison is found in them, I will certainly not escape the death penalty, and the prince will only begin to trust this doctor more. It'll make it much easier for Tran to accomplish his mission. Then suddenly the door to his office opened, and the doctor shouted nervously, asking, "Who's there?" When he saw the prince walk into the room, he was very surprised and didn't understand why he was here now. He asked if it was about his medicine. It was not yet complete. The prince replied that it wasn't about the medicine and asked, "Can he have a look at what's behind his back?" At this point, the doctor thought that if something went wrong, it would be bad. But she caught up with that thought and thought that the prince was sure this was where the medicine was kept. But it had never come to his office before. Tran that whatever it was, he needed to chase him away as soon as possible. So he said that rumors had reached him that the woman was already awake. The gentleman was surprised at how quickly the news reached him. The doctor replied that this case was connected with the prince, so he should find out as soon as possible. After that, the doctor said that he had already said that sweets were dangerous. Then he added that this girl dared to feed the prince such dangerous poison, and it was simply outrageous. This prince said that's why he threw out the cupcakes. The doctor confirmed it and said that he immediately wiped out the cupcakes. I tested them and found poison in them. After that, Tran told the Lord that he had heard that the girl could already speak. So he thought he could question her and asked what he thought about His Highness. The doctor then added that this pest should be thrown out of the castle at once. But then suddenly he saw the prince rise from his chair. He was very surprised and didn't understand how he did it. The gentleman friend had already come up to him and took him by the shirt, saying, "She was poisoning me. That's, not a funny joke." The doctor was very surprised and said that His Highness was standing. But at that moment the prince took and dismissed the doctor, saying that, to his regret, she did not. At that moment his assistant ran up and took the doctor's hands from behind. Tran didn't understand what was going on and asked the prince what they were doing. Said it was all a misunderstanding and so on. At this point, The gentleman mentioned that Shanti was worried about his condition, even though she could barely stand on her feet herself. He told the doctor to try not to disappoint him. With these words, he walked over to the doctor's desk and said that it was only a desk, but we also thought it was hiding something within itself. The closer the gentleman got to the table, the more nervous the doctor became. And when the prince started to open the box, he shouted for them to wait, because there were dangerous drugs in there. But the gentleman didn't listen to him, and took the papers out of the table, very surprised to see it. After a while, Shanti, Mr. Zest, and Ash were sitting in the living room talking. Prince's assistant asked how the girl was feeling. She replied that she had been resting for a week and felt fine, and she was ready to go back to work. But then she suddenly remembered the situation with the doctor and asked what they had done with Tran. Ash explained to her that he was imprisoned on charges of treason against the royal family. When the girl heard this, she was even a little upset. After a short pause, the prince said that they had found secret documents in his possession. As it turns out, he was slipping poison into Prince's supplements in small amounts, and it all started 10 years ago. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised that it had lasted so long. The princess said that it looked like the puppeteer had lured Tran to his side when he was very young. The girl didn't understand what puppeteer meant. The prince explained that all this time he was being groomed to stay out of the politics of the state. In such a sick state, he had lost all the influence he had. After that, the girl asked if Mr. Tran had said anything. The prince's aide said that he was as silent as a fish and said nothing on the matter. Then the girl said that it turns out they had no idea who was giving him orders. But the prince said that wasn't true, because they already knew that. He explained that the puppeteer was Queen Hera. Hearing this, the girl was very surprised that it was Her Majesty. Zest said the queen is a very cunning woman, but now Tran is in their hands. They can only wonder what else she can come up with. The girl didn't understand why the queen was doing this to Mr. Zest, but she couldn't understand if she had the right to ask such a thing. Her musings were interrupted by the prince and told her that that was why she should leave the castle. When the girl heard this, she was very angry and did not understand why. The Lord explained that it was very dangerous here, and that not only him, but now his surroundings were her target. He doesn't want the girl to get hurt in a battle that has nothing to do with her. It really hurt her to be told that she had nothing to do. But the prince went on and said he would give her a good recommendation for another kitchen. It would be safe there, and told her not to worry about paying benefits. The girl thought that if she obeyed His Majesty and just went with the flow, her life would be safe. But this option didn't suit her very well. So she said, "I will agree if you tell me that you no longer like and want to eat my sweets." There was no greater joy for this girl than to see the prince eat her desserts and enjoy them. The girl said that she only knows how to make sweets, but she still really wants to be his support. When the prince heard this, he was very surprised and didn't know what to say. He was touched by Shanti's attitude. Oh, he said it would be too dangerous for a girl like her. The girl said that if she was the only one to escape danger, all her sweetness would be filled with desire. She asked His Highness if he would allow her without worrying about him. But then suddenly the girl looked at her watch and saw that it was already late. She apologized and said that it was already time for her to prepare dinner, so she ran to the door and went out. When the boys were left alone, they were shocked at what was happening. After a while, Ash said that he thought Miss Shanti would be a reliable ally. The prince said he was telling the truth, but putting her in danger. The aide interrupted him and asked if it was not in his power to prevent it. At this time, the girl had already arrived in the kitchen, and as she started to prepare dinner, she was talking to the girl who was explaining to her, "Well, look, the first Prince Grace is the son of Queen Hera, and the second Prince Zest is the son of Lady Casnado, the now deceased favorite of the king." When Prince Zest began to show his talents and sharp mind, Queen Hera felt threatened by him and decided to isolate him. At that moment, Amy thought they were having a real battle for the throne. The girl who was telling her all this wondered why she suddenly wanted to talk about Mr. Zest. But Shanti didn't answer anything. She thought about how shocked she was when she found out the truth about Tran. At a time like this, you should definitely eat a couple of sweets to cheer yourself up, Amy thought. The girl standing next to her asked if she could hear her, because she had ignored her question. A few days later, when Shanti had already finally left herself well, then she prepared another dessert for the prince. When he tasted it, he said it was delicious and that he had wanted to try the cupcakes she made for a long time. The girl was very happy and said that she had heard that he was already able to walk. The prince said that it was all thanks to her. He was even starting to eat regular food. After he finished his dessert, he said he should have told her that. He apologized and said that until a couple of days ago, he had asked her to leave the castle and live in safety. But he really wanted to taste more of her sweets. He said he would protect her as best he could, and in return he asked that she always stay at his side. She was delighted with the news and said she would love to help him. The prince thanked her, but then he said he wanted to thank her properly and asked, "Maybe she wants something." The girl said she didn't need anything, but then she suddenly remembered that there was something she really wanted, and she told him that she wanted sugar. When the prince heard this, he was surprised. She explained that she needed the sugar to spread the sweets across the country and make them even more delicious. When the prince heard that she wanted to spread the sweets all over the country, he was very surprised at how deep and global her plans were. Thinking about it, he said he would be sure to get sugar for her. The girl was very happy when she heard this, but then she thought it must be a very difficult case. The prince agreed that it was very hard to find sugar in this country, at least for the moment. The master said that he wanted to do everything in his power for her to be happy. The girl was very happy about this news. So the months went by. The prince slowly started walking and exercising his muscles more. The girl continued making desserts, and some of the cooks were even more enthusiastic about the endeavor. And so after all this time, the prince one day summoned the girl to his office. When she entered, she asked, "Prince Zest, have you summoned me?" But when she looked closely at the gentleman, she was shocked. She saw that something had changed in him. When the prince saw the strange expression on her face, he asked what was wrong. She said that he had cut his hair and it surprised her very much. Afterward, the prince reached up to fix his hair and asked if it looked strange. The girl says no way, and that he looks incredible. Maybe it's the hairstyle that's a little off-putting, but by no means weird. The prince looked at her with loving eyes and thanked her for it. She said she was welcome, and they looked at each other. Ash, who was sitting next to them, didn't understand what they were both doing or why they were acting so strangely. Breaking that slight pause, the prince said that he called her because he had found the information on sugar, as she had requested. When the girl heard this, she even choked up. The prince explained that there would soon be a trade conference with representatives of Ratri's country. Having said that, he suggested that that's where he could to get sugar, and if he succeeds, it won't be long before he thanks the girl properly. When Amy heard the news about sugar, she was very excited about the news because she would finally be able to make more desserts and spread them around the country. The Lord's training also included swordsmanship lessons, and his teacher there was his assistant Ash. And during one of those lessons, Zest thought that when it came to swords, his assistant was like a different person. When the two cooks had a break, they went out for a walk and were talking. One of them said that he was wondering what kind of sweets they would be making today. Then he added that at first they all thought sweets were something strange, but now they were looking forward to them. The second cook said that he was very happy to have Shanti in their kitchen because she works very fast, cooks very tasty dishes, and in general she is a real cutie. When our second guy heard about his friend calling her a cutie, he got very angry because he liked Shanti very much too. At this moment the girl was in the library studying a little book which said that Ratri was for a sea state, emphasizing the observance of manners. They have the technology to develop and produce sugar. At that moment, the girl thought that this was her dream country. When I continued reading further, it said that sugar is used as medicine in this country, so they are not rich in sweets. That upset her. She realized that if there wasn't much sugar sweetness in the most important sugar country, it meant that things were not good at all in other countries out there. Amy thought she really wanted to make custard cakes and macaroons, and even more wanted to eat them. And at that moment she leaned against the bookcase, but it could not withstand her blow, so all the books fell on her head. But suddenly she was lucky, because Prince Zest was nearby and caught the book that was falling on her head. After that, he helped her stand up and asked if she was okay. The girl was surprised. She asked how the prince had gotten here. But then she realized it didn't matter and asked if he was hurt. The prince said he was fine. He was just coming from fencing class. After that, he bent down and started picking up the fallen books. Afterwards, the gentleman said he was happy to help her, then said she was reading too much and suggested she take a break. She agreed, and after a while she brought him a dessert. It was a treat called Florentine. When the gentleman took the dessert, he thought it looked appetizing and beautiful, but at first glance it might look stale. But when he tasted it, he said it was very tasty, and there was a nice crunch. After living with it for a bit, he said the flavor of the almonds goes great with the tea. The girl said this dessert is called Florentine. She covered the sponge dough with almonds, honey, and butter, all baked in the oven several times. Now the prince realized why they were so light. Shanti told him that when she had sugar, she would be able to make many more sweets. She then explained that sugar retains moisture, which gives food a unique texture. In addition, properly processed sugar can be handled even by beginners, and is very easy to carry around. When the prince had finished his dessert, he said that trade relations between Ratri and Gustrum had deteriorated over the past few years. The girl asked what had caused all this to happen. The gentleman explained that Ratri is rich in a variety of resources, and their country has little to offer for export, so they are not often able to bargain and negotiate. This is how year after year relations with Ratri got worse and worse. If Ratri's representatives were not satisfied with the current conference, it could be a reason to start a war. The girl was surprised that it was that bad. She thought that now was really not the time to beg for sugar. The girl said she was glad even just to know where the sugar was. When the prince looked at her, he thought that she had saved him, and he wanted to help her properly at least this time. A few days later, Zest arrived at the castle to see Grays, the first prince. He came close to Mr. Zest and said that it had been many years since they had last met. Zest asked if they could talk for a while. Gracie clearly didn't like the idea, but he had no choice. So Grace escorted his brother to his office, and as he sat down at his chair, said he looked chipper. Afterward, he said he could no longer remember the last time he had seen Zest not in a wheelchair. The brother replied that, thanks to his prayers, the last time he had seen Zest in a wheelchair, he had not seen him in a wheelchair. He's only getting better as time goes on. When Grace heard this, he got a little angry, but immediately said he didn't have much time and asked what he wanted. Zest decided to get straight to the point and said that trade talks with Ratri were about to take place and that he wanted to participate. When the brother heard this, he was surprised. Why Ratri? He suggested that maybe he had something to do with them, and he said it was out of the question, because neither he nor Grace himself would get any benefit from it. But Zest said that all he wanted to get out of the negotiations with Ratri was only sugar. When his brother heard this, he was surprised, for he did not know what it was. Zest told him it was an investment in the future. Soon, everyone will want some sugar for themselves, so he wants to stock up before prices rise. The basis of trade. At this point, his brother asked, "Sugar can only be bought by amateur collectors, can't it? It's not like it has any use." But Zest said there was, and that would make all the difference. After that, he put Shanti's dessert on the table to his brother. At this point, Grace, that before he only kept quiet and kept his head down. But now I'm going to get into a negotiation. That my presence by us negotiating will have no effect on you, brother, Zest said. Ha! Of what should I believe you? Asked Grace. If I negotiate you fail, I'll give you what you want so badly, his brother told him. But Grace didn't take the suggestion seriously and said, "One would think you had something I wanted." But his brother said, "How does he like the offer about the right to succeed to the throne?